Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ignorant Intellectual on Media. Today, I thought we'd do a mixed haul because I picked up a bunch of stuff from different places, from different people, at thrift stores, some stuff I bought new, some stuff I got from private sales. So it's all mixed. So let's do a mixed sale haul, and it should be fun. All right. So let's start. It's almost all movies. There's one book and five records or LPs also, but mostly it's movies. So I thought maybe we'd tackle the movies first. All right, one of the first. Uh, Here's the first movie. It's called Sweet Bean, the Japanese movie. As you can see, it's a Blu-ray. It's part of the Eureka's Masters of Cinema collection, which I collect. All right, uh, you can't get them in North America. You can only get them over in Europe, so you have to import them. So what I do is I get them off of Amazon whenever the price for one of them ends up dropping to $20 or lower. I'll usually pick one up. And that usually occurs every few weeks. There's always one of the titles in Eureka that drops below $20. So I'll pick it up if I've sold some stuff and I have some cash or whatever, I'll order it off of Amazon. And this one I did so. So this one is number 153 in the collection. All right. And it's came out in 2015, a Japanese film directed by who directed this film? Uh, Naomi Kawase. Naomi Kawase. Basically, it's about a man who owns a little, I don't know what you would call it, a bakery, a little store where he sells these desserts. They're like I can't remember what they are in English and Japanese. Yeah, he's a street vendor. All right. So he's a street vendor and he sells these pastries, I guess you could call them. It's like a pancake on the bottom, a pancake on the top, and then there's this sweet kind of bean paste in the middle. You've probably had them before. Um, and he has this little street store or whatever that he's selling these things at, and he needs some help in it. So there's this woman, like 75-year-old woman, who wants to work for him, and he's kind of reticent about doing that because of her age, and she has her hands are deformed or whatever, so he's not sure whether she'll be able to actually do any of the work. But um, he eventually ends up hiring her, and she ends up working with him, and she has this recipe and this equipment to make this bean paste that's much of a much higher caliber than what he buys it from, a company or whatever, this bean paste to make these pastries or whatever, right? So hers is better. So she ends up joining forces with him, and they make this better, and business flourishes, right? But then what happens is the reason why her hands are deformed is because she caught leprosy, right? She had leprosy at one time, and so there's this big stigma in Japan about leprosy victims or whatever, and so his business just dries up and stops because of her. So he ends up having to let her go, and then she ends up dying of pneumonia or something. I can't remember. Anyways, it's a really sweet story. It's really it takes on, like prejudice, like when you see somebody that's different or something's happened to somebody, how people treat them, right, in Japan or whatever, and it's kind of like a criticism of that. But overall, it's a pretty sweet film. So um, if you like Japanese cinema, you're going to like this film. All right. So it's called Sweet Bean. It's the Masters of Cinema, number 153. Right. Okay. Directed by Naomi Kawase. All right. So that's the first one. Second one is The Return of the Living Dead. All right. So this came out in the 80s. It was directed by Dan O'Bannon, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Dan O'Bannon. All right. And this is basically it's a spoof off of all the the George Romero films. Um, where this film doesn't take itself very seriously. It's more of a comedy than it is a horror, which is kind of like my favorite kind of horror. So But basically, it's about this guy who ends up accidentally releasing this gas that ends up reanimating these dead bodies. And of course, you have to have a bunch of teenagers partying nearby so they can be victims or whatever. And so that's what ends up happening, right? So I haven't watched this movie since the 80s, and I laughed my ass off when I did watch it in the 80s. Um, I have it on DVD, but I didn't have it on Blu-ray, so now I have it on Blu-ray. The only part of the movie that I find the funniest part about the whole movie, the part that I remember the most, is when the kid or kids end up going up into the attic of a house or a place. It has a one of those ladders that go up, and then you have a like a cubby hole in the ceiling or whatever. So they go up there and they close that cubby hole, and then uh, one of the zombies starts climbing up and starts banging on the top and goes, "I know you're in there. I can smell your brains." Right? So I don't know why, but that just struck me as funny when I was in my 20s, and I just laughed my ass off on that one. But I'll have to revisit the film. I haven't seen it in years, right? So that's The Return of the Living Dead. I also found the 25th anniversary on Blu-ray of Gandhi, which I also have on DVD, but I do not have on Blu-ray, so now I do. If you have not watched that, you must know who Gandhi is. I mean, it's very difficult not to know who Gandhi is once you're going to school or whatever. His resistance to the English, non-violent resistance to the English, basically changed all of Indian history. Right? The British ended up leaving. Right? And he did this through pretty much non-violent means. He became the father of the country, and he went on so many hunger strikes to get the English out of India, and the British finally left. Right, so and he ended up getting independence in what I think it was like 49 or 47, somewhere around there. Right, so um, and Ben Kingsley, I think he may have won the Oscar for his portrayal of Gandhi. Basically, it's a biopic of Gandhi and his life. So, and Kinsley did an extremely good job. It's his best role that he's ever had. And if he did win the Oscar, which I think he did, he totally deserves it. Yeah, won 8 Academy Awards, whichever ones they are. Best Picture is another one of them. All right, so that's Gandhi. I had it on. You're seeing a theme of me replacing a lot of my DVDs with Blu-rays. I will always have DVDs in my collection because there are films that just haven't had a Blu-ray release. So, um, but the ones that have, and I find them, I pick them up and then I just replace. Right. So another perfect example of that is Forgetting Sarah Marshall. All right. This is one of my all-time favorite romantic comedies. Um, it's up there with Love Actually, another one that I'm about to show you, and but my all-time favorite is When Harry Met Sally. That's such a great film. But Forgetting Sarah Marshall is an extremely good film. I think the reason why I enjoy it, and maybe a lot of other males enjoy this film, because it takes romance from the male's perspective rather than the female. So the main character in this film is not the girl. All right, it's the guy. It's what's his name from How I Met Your Mother. What was his name? The guy from How I Met Your Mother. I always forget his name. Jason Segel. All right, so he's the main character in it. Is Jason Segel. Anyway, so the movie is basically about him. He's like a musician, but what he does, he does the theme music for a popular um, TV show of which his girlfriend is the star, and then she thinks she's better than him, so she ends up dumping him. All right, and so he's all depressed and everything, and he he never really wanted to be, you know, doing TV show scores for for TV shows or whatever. He's a musician. He wants to create his own stuff. So he ends up deciding he's going to take a vacation, and um, and then the girl, the girl from that '70s show, uh, she's like a hostess at this vacation spot, and they end up hitting it off, and she kind of convinced him to work on this musical play that he wanted to create with puppets or whatever. So it really is a sweet film, and it just so happens that Sarah Marshall, that's the name of his girlfriend who dumped him, ends up taking a vacation in the same place, and so he's trying to forget her, and then she ends up showing up at the place where he's trying to forget her. Anyways, it's quite fun, and overall, it's really sweet as well. So, uh, all right, so that's Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And here's another example. All right, so this is the other romantic comedy that I was talking about. That's one of my all-time favorites, and that's Moonstruck. I have this on DVD, but I did not have it on Blu-ray. So now I have it on Blu-ray. Cher and Nicolas Cage, yeah, Nicolas Cage. She plays a very quirky character in this, which is very, very, very charming. And It's probably her best film. Although she was in a pretty like Mask was another one that she was really good in, but I think Moonstruck is probably her greatest film. Cher, I'm talking about, right? Anyway, so it's yeah, it's a bit crazy. It's a bit crazy type of film, and you'll probably like it if you haven't seen it. All right, what's up after that? Okay, so here's two films by Seijun Suzuki. All right, so you have Kagero Za and Yumiji. Yumiji. All right, so this is two of his most famous films, but it's a trilogy. All right, it's called the Taisho trilogy. Basically, Taisho was a time period in Japanese history not too long ago, um, and he bases a trilogy, three films in that period, and they're all related, kind of ghost stories, kind of um, like mysteries. Kind of, he's a pretty quirky director. Um, he started off, I mean, he started off doing a lot of B movies, and the formulaic B movies, these movies that would accompany a double feature. You'd have the main movie, and then you'd have the B movie to have the double feature in the cinema or whatever, right? So he would do a lot of those, and then he went out on his own. And actually, he was blacklisted for about a decade because he ended up suing the movie company that he was working for, um, and for firing him unwarranted unwarranted firing, right? So anyway, but then he got to experiment more and get more into the things, and he became really associated with a lot of Yakuza films. There was a lot of Yakuza films in his filmography, but the thing that he's known most for is this trilogy. This is the second and the third film in the trilogy. I mean, they're not related in any way. It's the time period that relates them to make them into a trilogy. It's not like you watch one, then you watch the next one, you watch the next one, all the same characters. No, it's three different independent films, all taking place during the same time period and all having similar themes. So, like film critics kind of put them together with the three of them. So I got two of these in a trade, these two in a trade, but the guy didn't have the third one. Um, so I'll have to go looking for the third one. What's up next? Okay, so then I found this. This girl was selling this for $10. So I bought this for $10. It's basically the first 8 movies of Friday the 13th. So you got the original, part two, part three, the final chapter, which is the fourth one, part five, A New Beginning, uh, part six, Jason Lives, part seven, A New Blood, and part eight, Jason Takes Manhattan. And out of all the films, other than the first one and maybe the second one, I really like. I haven't watched the film since probably the '90s, or when the next Jason film came out, I would watch it, right? So, and the last one, that eighth one, it's not the last film in the franchise, but the the last one in this was Jason Takes Manhattan. I actually quite enjoyed that film. It's kind of just a little bit different than the average um, Friday the 13th film where he just goes around and kills people, right? He still does that, but he does it. A lot of it was outside and him traveling around Manhattan, so it's kind of it kind of there's a bit of a breath of fresh air in it. It's more outside than inside. It's less confined. It's more open space. Anyways, it was a bit different, and for some reason I enjoyed that. So probably Jason Takes Manhattan is my favorite film other than maybe the first two, right? So, and then after less than a week later, after I find this, and this is still new in its packaging, right? Um, uh, Another person end up selling that. So basically, it's basically the same thing except on Blu-ray. So now I have both DVD and Blu-ray, and so that's cool. And then I found this, which is the first film, still new for $10, and it's the Steelbook, still with the J cover and everything, still in its original packaging, right? So I'm doing a lot of Jason lately, and then that's not even done because I found another one. Oh no, I'm incorrect. It's a different franchise. All right, so Friday the 13th Blu-ray on Steelbook Blu-ray still in its package for $10. Can't beat that. I also found in a previous video I was talking to you guys about I got the Sherlock Holmes, Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes Steelbook Blu-ray, and then I found the second one, a Game of Shadows one on Blu-ray, but I didn't show it in the previous video because it was upstairs. I was watching it. I was going to watch it at the time. So here's the Steelbook, the second Steelbook of A Game of Shadows, and I don't know. I just watched A Game of Shadows, and I really enjoyed that film. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. and uh, Jude Law are really good. I really enjoy that, and I liked it because this one had Moriarty in it, like as one of the main characters in this film, right? So, um, quite good film. I think I may actually like it better than the first one. I'm not sure. I'll have to rewatch the first one because I watched the first one when it first came out, and then it was a couple of years later or whatever that the second one came out, and then I watched that one, and now it's been a few years since either one of them have come out, and so then I just watched the second one. I didn't watch the first one before, so maybe I'm just being influenced that I just recently watched the second one, and maybe the first one is better, but I think this one is pretty good. So, all right, so that's that one, and then we have uh, Halloween 40 years later. This is basically, I think, the last Halloween, isn't it, so far, unless they've rebooted the franchise again. But this one is basically uh, Michael Myers versus Jamie Lee Curtis again. So you get Jamie Lee Curtis back in the Halloween franchise, and I'm not sure what the reviews on that was, but you got to watch it. You have to watch it because Jamie Lee Curtis. It's like when the Terminator franchise ended up going back to its roots when they got Sarah Connor back in the mix, right? Um, uh, and that was a really good film I found as well. All right, so this is the last Halloween film. Basically, it's between Jamie Lee Curtis and Mike Myers again. All right, so and I also found this one, John Carpenter's Award. I had this on DVD, so when I saw this ad on Kijiji or whatever it was, it said a Blu-ray and DVD combo. So I thought it was in a little blue case, like Blu-rays come. But this was the transition period between DVDs to Blu-rays, and a lot of times you ended up getting the Blu-ray in the DVD case because they're still using the DVD case. I mean, you would go to Blockbuster and you get the DVD cases, you get the Blu-ray inside the DVD case. But what they would do is they would have the what would you call that? The wraparound paper or whatever, this thing, um, in the DVD case. But then they would add a paper to the part of it because it was small, right? And if you ever found those ones, you could always take the Blu-ray out of this DVD case and put it in a Blu-ray case, and the jacket to it or whatever you call it would fit because it's actually a Blu-ray jacket, right? This one is a DVD Blu-ray case, and it's the size of the DVD, so I can't take it out to use it like a Blu-ray, right? So, and then when you open it up, it's one of those dual side. There's only one disc. One side is a DVD, the other side is a Blu-ray. So I know I didn't have it on Blu-ray, but this is not what I expected. I thought it would be in a regular Blu-ray case. So if I find it again in an actual Blu-ray case itself, then I'll probably replace it. But until then, I still have it on Blu-ray. All right, and the award is basically Was it John Carpenter's last film, I think, right? He hasn't done a film since this one. This one was what, in the early 2000s, wasn't it? Anyways, it's basically about a woman who burns down a house and then ends up in a mental institution. And while she's in the mental institution, this ghost of one of the former mental patients that was living there, uh, that was there and I guess died, starts haunting her and talking to her, and it goes on from there, right? So, um, next up after that is I found this uh, 4K Blu-ray uh, of the first Halloween film from 1978. It's it's still in its original packaging, so it's new. The person I bought it off of hadn't even watched it yet. Um, so you may be asking me because I have very few 4K uh, films in my collection because I do not have a 4K TV or a 4K player. So why would I go about buying this? Especially since, um, sorry, this one does have the Blu-ray to it, but I also bought this off of the gentleman as well, which is four other of John Carpenter's films in 4K. Escape from New York, The Prince of Darkness, They Live, and The Fog. All four of them in one case, right? Which I love. I love that kind of thing, especially when they put the director's name and the movies all in the spine, not just the movies. All right. Um, so basically, this is just Blu-rays. There's no this is just 4Ks. There's no Blu-rays in it, right? So, but anyways, the reason why I bought it is because it was a good price. Number one, and number two, I can now have 4Ks in my collection, which will shrink the amount of space John Carpenter takes up on my shelves. And I ended up getting Father's Day is coming up, and my daughter ended up buying me um, a 4K player, a region-free 4K player, so I can watch any movie that's in my library now on my Blu-ray player because it plays 4Ks and it plays any region's Blu-rays or DVDs, right? So all right, so that's John Carpenter, five movies by John Carpenter. All right, on 4K, and next up after that is another one that I have on DVD, but I didn't have on Blu-ray, and that's Cinderella Man, one of the great boxing films. It um, is not the greatest. I would say that Rocky is probably the greatest boxing film, followed by maybe Raging Bull. But this one is up there. It's really good. It takes place in what, the Depression era, right? And he ends up boxing a lot in order to feed his family, basically, and he uh, becomes very good at it. All right, so it stars Russell Crowe. All right, so that's Cinderella Man. Did I do these ones? I did. Okay, what's up next? Okay, Yukon Gold. All right, which is two short films from the National Film Board of Canada. Anytime I see anything that, if you look at the thing there, the NFB there, anytime I find these on the secondary market, I just pick them up because I don't know, maybe it's patriotism or not, but the NFB has an extremely good reputation internationally on making really good films, especially short films. Not so much longer films, but short films. They're like the best in the world at creating short films. Um, and there's two short films here, um, and this is all about the Yukon Gold Rush. So the first one is called Gold, and it's from 1955. It's 10 minutes and 32 seconds. And the second one is Frozen Gold of the Klondike, 17 minutes, 22 seconds from 1981. And it's basically two documentaries about the Yukon Gold Rush, right? So I don't know if it's good or not. I haven't watched it. So, all right. Next up after that is a Jacques Rivette film I found on DVD. Rivette is, he's the, what do you call him? He was like the start, the basic, like he's the guy when it came to what the French Renaissance in film. What do they call it? I can't remember the name of what they called it. But this one isn't from that period of time. This one is actually from 2001, but it does have that signature very long uh, type of, Rivette is famous for making really long films, right? This one is over 2 hours long, so it's basically a romantic comedy. So, but anytime I see a Rivette film, I'll pick it up because I collect Rivette, right? So, what else? All right, next up is another film that I have on DVD, but I didn't have on Blu-ray, and that's Taxi Driver, Martin Scorsese's greatest film. Some people will say that, his gangster film. Uh, why do I keep forgetting the name of that film? Anyways, I'll put it down here, or I'll show a picture of it. A lot of people will say that is his best. The one with Ray Liotta. Is his best film. Goodfellas. Is it Goodfellas? Yeah. Anyway, so, but I think Taxi Drivers is his best film. And this is basically, it's got postcards in it, and it's got the Blu-ray, and it's, one of these fold up digipack kind of things, right? But the guy just put it on the shelf naked, and if you notice, see the lines coming down on the spine? It's because he didn't protect it. Um, and it's getting damaged in the corners. But anyways, I found it for cheap, and it's Jodie Foster's first film. She plays a underage prostitute in this film. So, and this film is extremely good. I don't know if you've watched it or not. It's basically about a guy who's a taxi driver, obviously, right? And he decides that New York is a cesspool of grossness, let's put it that way. And he wants to do something about it. And what he does is he centers this fixation on a senator. I think he's a senator, and he's going to assassinate him, basically. And so he tries to do that. He gets thwarted without anybody knowing that he tried to do that. And then he's frustrated, so he goes back, and what ends up happening is in his neighborhood, there's this Jodie Foster character. She's like a 14-year-old hooker, and Harvey Keitel is her pimp. And that offends him. And because he got frustrated in killing the senator, he goes after and gets Jodie Foster away from the pimp and kills the pimp instead, right? And basically becomes a hero rather than an infamous character. So basically, Scorsese, what he was doing is doing that. There's a fine line between a hero and a criminal, right? Just like there's a fine line between a criminal and a police officer. They both have a similar mentality in that a lot of people are attracted to becoming police officers because they have a heightened good. They don't like being told what to do. They like to be in charge, but they don't want to be in charge illegally. They want to be in charge legally, right? And criminals have the same aspect. They have they don't like to have a boss. They don't like to be pushed around at work for a little bit of money. So they end up becoming criminals instead because they have more freedom that way or whatever, right? So it's kind of like a psychology flip of the coin between police officers and criminals. Because most people are just, your average person, right? They want to, find love, get married, have kids and all that. They don't want to be, a lot of people just don't want to act as in the protector of society or the taking advantage person of society that a criminal does, right? So, anyway, but what Scorsese does in Taxi Driver is he embeds both of those type of ideologies in the same person. Do you understand what I mean? Where a person who is just as capable of committing a criminal act is just as capable of committing a heroic act, right? It just depends on the circumstances. So, De Niro goes out to kill the senator and ends up saving a 14-year-old prostitute from his pimp, and she ends up going back home, and her parents are extremely happy to get their daughter back and everything, right? So anyway, so that's Taxi Driver, one of the greatest films ever made. And I finally got it on Blu-ray, all right? And I did that one. I did all these. I did all these. I did all those. I did. Okay, so next up is in a previous video, probably the previous thrift video. Anyways, I had my previous video I made about I bought a bunch of Criterions off a gentleman, like 30 something Criterions off of him, and he also had a bunch of films by Kieslowski, Krzysztof Kieslowski. He's a Polish director. He began directing actually documentaries during when Poland was a satellite state to the USSR, so it was a Soviet run or it was a communist state, right? So he was directing documentary films in this communist state, and what would always happen with his films is he wanted to reflect truthfully the times that he was living in through these documentaries, and the government would end up censoring them or editing them, and basically he stopped doing documentaries because of that and started getting into fiction films, but of the same nature almost. So basically, he thought, okay, he could direct a, let's say, about some workers or whatever in the town he is, and he directs it as a documentary, and then the government starts cutting it up and changing it in order to have its proper propaganda, right? So he said, well, okay, how about I do the exact same thing, but create it rather than make it a documentary, make it a fiction film, and then it passes, the censors easier because they know it's a fiction film, it's not a documentary, right? But he can tell the exact same story. So actually, it's funny. So in this state, basically, his 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 films were more truthful the more fictitious they were, right? So because they would get by the censor, and you'd be able to watch the film and experience what life was like at that time, kind of thing, right? So um, anyway, so ended up becoming he ended up leaving Poland. He did a bunch of early films in Poland, but then he ended up leaving Poland and going to France, if I remember correctly. And then he started directing some really good films in France. All right, he did a well. Let's just go through it. All right. So basically, he has a film in the Criterion Collection, which I showed previously, which was The Double Life of Veronique, right, which is a French film or a Polish film. He's a Polish director, but he directed. It's a French film, basically, about these two girls are doppelgangers of themselves, one living in Poland, one living in France. Anyway, so I already told you about that film. Well, so what this gentleman did was bought a bunch of Kieslowski's films. All right, so he bought this one, which is the Kino Video Kozlowski, or um, basically a bunch of his early films, basically six of his early films. All right, right there. All right. So they basically are a short film about killing, a short film about love, camera buff, no end, blind chance, and the scar. These are all early films. After he stopped doing documentaries and started doing fiction films, these are like six of his earliest films that he made in Poland. Then he left Poland and went to France. And what he did was he did this, uh, among other things, but the Decalogue. Okay, all right. So the Decalogue. It's basically 10 films on three DVDs, but basically, um, in the Old Testament, in the Bible, you have the Ten Commandments, right? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, so on and so forth. So basically, what he does is he does a film on each of those commandments. So there's 10 of them, and he called it the Decalogue, basically, and and they were TV movies, right? So that was the next thing that he got, and then the third thing. So after that, Kozlowski did what probably is his greatest achievement, and that is his Three Colors trilogy. Right? They're all three French films. One's called Blue, one's called White, and one's called Red. And basically, it's for the three different colors of the French flag. Right? And he does three stories. They're not sequels to each other. They're individual films, but all under uh, the idea of the flag. What the blue means in the flag, what the white means in the flag, and what the red means in the flag. Um, he does a film with that theme, and all three of them are extremely good. Uh, I haven't watched them reputation-wise. They're all three of them are really good. So basically, I have most of Kozlowski's films from buying it off of that gentleman, and hopefully I'll enjoy them because probably spent like a good $80 to $100 just on those films, right? So um, okay, so that's all the films. Next up is the one book that. Oh no, I forgot one. Uh, Also from the same guy that I bought the Kozlowskis and the Criterions is he had this one, volume one of the Eclipse series that Criterion puts out. Um, this is the first one, and it's early Bergman. A bunch of I think six or five, one, two, three, four, five of Bergman's early films called Torment, Crisis, Port of Call, Thirst, and To Joy. Um, so now I don't know, I have about maybe 10 to 15 volumes in this series of films. Um, uh, Eclipse films or Eclipse series from the Criterion Collection. So basically, the Eclipse is like a bit cheaper versions of Criterion's, where um, they don't deem that these films are great enough to be put into the main collection and restored and have a booklet to it and have a whole bunch of other stuff added along with the film. These are more the the director is important. So let's do like the off films, not their greatest films, but their other films, and put them in the Eclipse series. So you have like Ozu, you have a whole bunch of different directors that are in the main Criterion Collection, but these films aren't, the top of their game type of films. These are more of their, maybe it's early films, maybe it's the late films, maybe people are still interested in watching them because Bergman's a very big name in film, so they'll watch like his main great films, and then maybe they'll want to explore the filmmaker a little bit further. Well, that's what the Eclipse series is for, is to get his other films that may not be the as great as the great ones, right? Um, so you have a bunch of different directors in it, and they're all like early films or the late films or this period of films from this director or that period of films from this director kind of idea, right? So this is early Bergman. These are his early films. So um, uh, they're not numbered in the collection, but they are. Each one of the box sets has a number to it, and I don't know. I think they're up to like 30 something of them now. I don't know. I'm guessing. I know the highest one I have is in, I think it's in the, no, the highest one I have is in the 40s. Anyways, so that's the Eclipse series. All right, so that's all the films. Now, I did find one book. It was pretty, not too much great hunting in the thrift stores, but I did find one book, and that's Sue Grafton's Y is for Yesterday. This is her last book before her death. Now, Sue Grafton is a huge name in mystery fiction, detective fiction, that kind of thing, up there with Agatha Christie. But Christie's probably better. All of those guys. Um, she's one of the big names. And how she decided to do her books was do it in them in alphabetical order and do a letter. It's called the letter series or whatever. So she started off at A, and she was going to write a thriller or a mystery book for each letter of the alphabet. And she got up to Y, and then she ended up dying. So she never did finish it. She got 25 out of the 26 letters. But each one, if you're a mystery fan, nobody really has anything bad to say about Grafton. So this film is basically This book is basically about, there's like a sexual assault on campus, on a college campus, and these uh, it's like a group of guys, they sexually assault this girl, and they film it while they're doing it. All right, and then that film, that recording or whatever, gets stolen, and then another person on campus who they thought stole it gets murdered, but they never did find that film, right? So then the three of them end up, in court, and they end up getting convicted or whatever happens to them. But one of them, after a decade, ends up coming out of prison and ends up going back to his parents' place. And then, lo and behold, that a copy of that film is sent to that guy's parents, and a blackmail ensues, right? So the parents end up hiring a private investigator, who's the main character of this film, all right, um, to investigate who sent that film and everything else, and then you get into it, right? And there's a deeper thing going on in this that you find out and everything, but I don't want to ruin the book for you, all right? So it's a very good mystery book if you like mysteries, all right? So that's Sue Grafton's Y is for Yesterday. And then I have 5 LPs, and then we'll be done, all right? So first I found two albums by The Jam, all right? So I found All Mod Cons, which is probably their best album, all right? And then one a little bit later on, their second last album, if I remember correctly, Sound Effects, all right? So basically, there was a punk, uh, explosion in Britain, and during the late 70s, you had the Clash and the Sex Pistols with Nevermind the Bollocks, and the Clash with London Calling and their self-titled album. And there was like a surge of punk music in England, right? So um, the Jam were a part of that, but they were kind of like a hybrid almost. They weren't really like they definitely weren't punk like Sid Vicious or any of those guys, Johnny Rotten, those guys, nothing like that. Um, because their stage presence, they were always wearing suits, right? And they had short cut hair like the Beatles had or whatever, right? Um, and their influences were some of the Beatles, but their main influence was something that was called mod, right? And you even see it in this album. It's called All Mod Cons, right? Uh, so they basically were influenced by like bands like the Who, right? And also Ray Davies. They're very influenced by Ray Davies of the Kinks, right? So you'll see that type of music, and they could play their instruments, right? And you could see it. So they were kind of like some people would call them they're too mainstream or too pop for punk, right, or whatever, right? But they were part of the punk scene at that time, and they started in what it was like in the mid '70s. They got popular in the late '70s, and then by '82, what's his name? The main guy in it, the singer and the guitar player. What was his name? McLaughlin, John. What was his name? Does it say? I'm so bad for names, ignorant intellectual, right? No, Paul Weller. So Paul Weller actually broke the band up for no reason. They were at the top of their game, and then he decided he was going to leave the band, and then the band kind of broke up because he didn't want to be that type of band that just hangs around to hang around. He said so. He said we were at the top of our game. We basically you know put out whatever we needed to put out, and anything after that would just be copies of what they put out previously. So they become irrelevant, more and more irrelevant. So he said let's just stop it when we're at the top of our game or whatever, right? So he stopped, and then he went on to form another band. I can't remember the name of it, and then he had a solo career as well, right? So but anyways, the Jam, basically when I got into punk, I listened to British punk, I listened to American punk, I listened to the Clash, I listened to never mind the Bollocks, I listened to the Ramones on stateside and other bands like that, and then I got into more of the '80s punk or whatever, right? So I listened to the Jam, but I never really got into the Jam because it didn't have that aesthetic feel that I was listening to at the time. They were just a little bit different. It was like there was a big influence from '60s rock um, and pop that influenced their music. And since I already heard most of that stuff, and then you hear it just a little bit differently with a punk feel to it, was kind of interesting. But it didn't grab a hold of me like the other bands did. So I didn't listen to them much. But lately, now that I'm older and I'm going back and listening again, I find that music really good. So I ended up finding two of their albums and I picked them up. All right, so that's the Jam. If you like punk with kind of like a '60s pop influence, '60s rock influence, that kind of thing, you'll probably like them. All right, and if I find any of the other albums, I'll pick them up as well. All right, so next album I picked up. Now these are all from the record store, the used record store that I like to go to. It's actually, they have CDs, they have records, they have movies and all that. So I have picked up movies from them as well, but most of the time, what I pick up is albums from the LPs. So this one was $15, and it's Mahavishnu's Orchestra Birds of Fire. All right. So this basically, I think this. I was trying to remember the name of the guitarist because he's extremely good. Yeah, John McLaughlin. See, I confused the two of them, right? Um, I confused Weller with McLaughlin. All right, so John McLaughlin, who's the guitarist in this jazz. So this is jazz fusion. It's a fusion of rock and jazz put together, and it's one of the greatest albums of all time. I can't emphasize how good this album is. If you like jazz and you like rock, then this is really going to blow your mind if you haven't listened to it. Now Mahavishnu Orchestra went through like two or three different lineups, but it was their first lineup and their first two albums. This is their second album. Their first two albums were probably their best albums, and this one is by far their greatest. And the guitar playing on this and the violin on this is just extremely good. You won't have ever heard anything like this before. If you listen to Frank Zappa, some of Frank Zappa's, this when I listen to this kind of remind me a bit of the aesthetic feel of Frank Zappa, but this was uh, well, it was up there with like Hot Rats and all of Zappa's stuff. But this stuff is just it's jazz fusion is what they call it. But his guitar playing, McLaughlin's guitar playing on this is extremely good. I wouldn't be surprised if I was to look up a list of who the greatest guitarists are all time. You get the Stevie Ray Vaughns and Eddie Van Halen and Joe Satriani and uh, Jimi Hendrix maybe, and these guys. But I bet you he would be on the list. That's somewhere on the list because his guitar playing is extremely good. And this album is just fantastic. When I'm doing the CD collections that I'm doing, I haven't done one in a while. But my CD collection, I will mention albums as I'm going through my CD collection that are some of the greatest albums of all time. Well, I would easily include this album in it. So if you have not listened to this album, do yourself a favor, pick this album up, whether on CD or LP, and listen to it. And then come back and tell me what you thought of it, because I think your mind will be blown. All right, next up after that is a Canadian band, the five-man electrical band. This is their self-titled album. It's their first album since they changed their name. They had a name previous to this. I can't remember the name of that um, name of that band, but they ended up like the producer of this album said that they should change their name because the Shirelles I can't remember the name of it. I'll put it here. All right. Uh, he said it was kind of sounded dated, so they ended up changing their name. And what's his name in the band? You think I can remember names? I can't, right? And anyways, he had a song called Five Man Electrical Band. All right. And then they said, "Hey, that's exactly what we are. Let's name ourselves that, right?" So that's what they named themselves at, and this is their debut album of the renaming of the band, right? And actually, the first song on it is that song, Five Man Electrical Band. Right? This song has that one, and probably the most famous song on this is Half Past Midnight, which was originally a song by that they had put out under their previous name, but then they ended up reviving it and putting it on this album, right? So this album does not have their most famous song, which is Signs. Signs, signs. Can you sing it, or am I encroaching on somebody's copyright? Signs, signs. Everywhere there's signs. That kind of thing. Um, this isn't on that album. That song isn't on this album, but this is their first official five-man electrical band album, and it's very good if you like Canadian rock. All right, and I was looking for this for like the longest time on CD because I never really when the switch from LP to CD happened in the mid '80s. I was on board with it big time. All right. In fact, I had stopped collecting LPs because I would travel with my music and I'd have a Walkman that would use cassette tapes, right? So I would buy cassette tapes more than I would buy LPs. But the first piece of music that I ever bought was an LP, and that was Pink Floyd The Wall. Uh, Back in the early '80s, I bought that. And But eventually, what happened was companies started putting out these recordable uh, cassette tapes, blank cassette tapes that would have 90 minutes. You could get ones for 60 minutes and ones at 90 minutes. And the 90-minute ones were great because you could take an album that you have on a LP, you put it on your stereo, and, and your stereo has a cassette player, right? Put the cassette in there, the blank cassette, and then you can tape it onto the cassette, right? The blank cassette. So what I ended up doing was transferring all the music that I had onto cassettes to play in my Walkman, right? Or people would walk around with these big boom boxes. They would call them ghetto blasters from where I came from, but I think they're called boom boxes mostly. That's what kind of stuck with boom boxes. So they're basically the portable stereos that you get with the cassette tapes and the radio and the big two big speakers on each side, right? Um, uh, so tapes were more convenient than LPs. LPs you would listen to at home on your record player, but cassette tapes you could carry around with you in your Walkman or with your boombox or whatever, right? Um, so that's what I did. And they're perfect because they're 90 minutes long, 45 minutes on one side, 45 minutes on the other side. Um, the 45 minutes is pretty much almost every LP had, around 20 minutes on each side. So you could record the whole album on one side of the cassette tape and then record a different album on the other side of the cassette tape. And you wouldn't have to, um, go back to the record player and flip the disc over to play the other side, right? You can just put it in your cassette tape and press play and listen to the whole album, right? And there are some that would flip uh, and play the other side of the cassette tape without having to take it out of the and flipping it over. So that was cool as well. You could listen to two albums without having to go back to your stereo, right? So, um, but anyways, I'm digressing. So, why I was mentioning that was because um, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in Canada, what happens is if you go through the history of music in Canada, there is musicians that are actually, believe it or not, easier to find on LP than they are on CD. All right, especially any band that put out their content before the CD became popular. So any like music from the early 80s to the 70s to the 60s and everything, unless you're like a really great mainstream band or a very popular band, let's say like the Guess Who or Bryan Adams or something like that, which the stuff would be transferred from LP and put onto CD for all the years that CDs were the main go-to for listening to music was on CD, right? So it lasted from what the mid 80s, 84, 85 to until streaming came along, right? Um, so what would happen is the more popular acts in Canada would get the reissues onto CD, right? But the ones that weren't, or maybe were at the time of them putting out the albums, kind of faded into the past before the CD came out, and then you wouldn't be able to find the CD. Or if they did produce some CDs, it was always in a limited amount and they're difficult to find. So some of the greatest music in Canadian history, extremely difficult to find on CD. All right. But a lot easier to find on LP. But if you didn't have a record player, then you would never be able to play them. So I didn't collect them. I have over like 10,000 CDs, but I only have a few hundred LPs, and I only have those LPs over the last few years. I started collecting LPs, right? Um, so it's very difficult, and this would be one of them. Extremely difficult. I don't know if this ever had a CD release or not, but Five Man Electrical Band are one of the great Canadian bands, right? And I don't know. I had a lot easier time finding this on LP than I ever did looking for it on CD because I never did find it on CD in all the years that I've been collecting CDs. Never did find any Five Man Electrical Band except the exception to it is a greatest hits package. You'll always get all the Canadian bands in a greatest hits package. So if you like the Headpins, all right, great band. Uh, uh, they have a lead singer, female lead singer. What was her name? Like I said, ignorant intellectual. Um, Personally speaking, I think she has the greatest rock voice of all time of any female voice, even more than what's her name from Heart, right? She had an extremely good voice, that gruff kind of high pitched voice that like hard rock is just made for. Darcy, what was her name? Darcy. Her first name was Darcy, if I remember correctly. Anyways, so the Headpins had like three really good albums, but I don't know if any of them ever ended up getting put out on CD, and if they did, it was such limited amounts. I haven't been able to find any of them. But then a few years ago, when I decided to start collecting records, playing records, because I bought a record player, um, bam! I found all of the Headpins music on LP. Like it's like commonplace, right? So, Toronto is another Canadian band that's that way, right? Can't find any of their stuff on CD, but you want to find it on LP. Pretty much any used record store you go into, you're going to find some Toronto, right? So I thought that was great. I ended up finding albums that I've been looking for like a decade or two on LP, and I go, finally, I get to listen to this, right? So um, it's kind of moot because you can still find a lot of that stuff on, Spotify or whatever, for free. But yeah, it was cool. So when I found that, I thought that was cool, and it was $10, right? So all right, so that's Five Man Electrical Band, and last is John Hiatt's Slow Turning. Slow Turning is probably Hiatt's most recognized song. It's on this album. Um, I picked this up. I don't know a lot about Hiatt. He's kind of like a country rock kind of guy, acoustic singer songwriter type of dude. But it was recommended by a friend. If you ever find any John Hiatt, pick it up. I think you'll like it. So I found this for $10 at the record store. Probably his most known album, and I'm going to listen to it, see how it sounds, see if I like it. Right. So that's Slow Turning by John Hiatt. All right. So those are the 5 LPs that I found. Those are the movies that I found and the one book I found. All right. So we're all done here. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, leave me a thumbs up. Think about subscribing. I'd appreciate it, but no pressure. And I will talk to you in my next video. You have a great day, and bye for now.